The theater lights dimmed slowly, plunging the audience into an almost reverent silence. The stage, lit only by a single spotlight, waited for the young woman who had just crossed oceans and distances to be there. Anna took a deep breath before sitting at the piano. Her hands, though steady, carried the weight of a heart beating far too fast. It was her first performance in the city, the first step into a renowned conservatory that had seemed unreachable just months before. The chill of responsibility ran down her spine, but as soon as her fingers touched the keys, the outside world vanished. Each note was a confession, each chord a fragment of her soul laid bare before attentive, judging eyes. The melody began softly, almost hesitant, but soon gained strength. The piano seemed to speak a language only she commanded, a mixture of intensity and vulnerability. The audience fell into a trance, as if guided by an invisible force. Some closed their eyes. Others watched her fixedly, unable to move. At the back of the hall, leaning almost carelessly against a leather seat, Dan observed her in silence. He never applauded before the end, never smiled, never showed any emotion. Only his eyes, cold and calculating, followed Anna's every movement. To those who knew him, he was simply the elegant man who controlled the theater and much of the city. To her, he was still a stranger, although, even without seeing him clearly, she felt his presence like one feels the gaze of a predator, lurking in the shadows. The last chord echoed and faded into the air. Silence was broken by a wave of intense applause that filled the hall. Anna stood, blushing slightly at the intensity of the ovation, and gave a simple bow. She did not seek glamour, only recognition that she had conveyed what she truly felt. Backstage, her heart still racing, she tried to steady her breathing. She was carefully putting away her sheet music when she heard firm footsteps approaching. The once busy atmosphere of voices and movement seemed to fall into suspension. "Beautiful recital," said a deep voice, unhurried. Anna looked up. In front of her stood a tall man, his features sharp, his posture impeccable, watching her as though he could pierce straight through her. He wore a perfectly tailored dark suit, and there was something about his presence that filled the room more than anything else within it. "Thank you," she replied, her voice steady. Though her heart beat harder than she would admit, he extended his hand, a simple gesture, yet in his case, it carried a strange weight. "Dan, I own this theater." The introduction sounded almost like a statement of fact, as if it were natural for her to already know who he was. Anna shook his hand. The contact was brief but intense. His skin was cold, his grip firm. There was something calculated even in the way he looked at her, as if every detail were being measured and catalogued. "Anna," she said simply, offering nothing more. A silence stretched between them, heavy, uncomfortable, and at the same time fascinating. She realized she had been holding her breath, only noticing when she released it in a low sigh. "The piano is not just technique for you." His words came slowly, almost like a verdict. "It's as if it were an extension of your own skin." Her brows arched slightly, surprised by the precision of his observation. She wasn't used to anyone seeing beyond the surface. "Maybe," she answered carefully. "It's the only place I feel I can be real." Dan tilted his head, and for a fleeting instant, a faint smile or something resembling one touched his lips, but it vanished too quickly to be certain. He looked at her a moment longer, silent, then stepped back. "Welcome to the city, Anna." His words sounded more like a warning than a greeting. She nodded, trying not to reveal the strange mixture of fear and attraction she felt. When he walked away, the air seemed lighter, as if the shadow that accompanied him had lifted. In the days that followed, Anna's debut recital was the talk among students and professors at the conservatory. But what echoed most in her mind was not the applause, nor the praise, it was Dan's gaze. She could not understand why, among so many unfamiliar faces, his was the only one that lingered, carved into her memory. At night, lying in her small apartment, she recalled his cold elegance, the way he spoke like a man carrying secrets. It made her restless, as though she were being summoned to something she could not comprehend. She told herself it was just her imagination, the nerves of her debut, but deep down, she knew something had begun in that encounter, something pulling her into a territory she did not control, into a darkness that attracted her as much as it frightened her. Meanwhile, at the theater, Dan replayed the recital in his mind in silence. He was not easily impressed, but there was something about her that unsettled him, a raw intensity, so unlike the masks and poses of those he was used to. "A prey that doesn't yet know she's been chosen," he thought, pouring himself a glass of wine. Anna had no idea that, from that night on, her life was no longer hers alone. The days following the recital brought a new routine for Anna. Mornings were filled with intense classes at the conservatory, afternoons, with hours of practice in stuffy rooms where the sound of instruments overlapped with voices, and nights, with small performances in the theater's halls. The piano, once her escape, had also become her prison, demanding an almost total surrender. But something distracted her, something beyond the reach of her discipline. Dan, he didn't speak much. He merely appeared among the red curtains, in the discreet shadows of the balconies, or at the back of the audience. He never sought attention, but his presence was so heavy it became impossible to ignore. Always elegant, dressed in dark suits that seemed to blend with the setting, He observed every rehearsal, every performance, like a man studying a chessboard. The musicians whispered among themselves, and Anna, even when she tried not to listen, caught fragments of their conversations. "They say he's not just the owner of the theater," murmured a violinist. "He knows dangerous people, deals that never make it into official contracts." Another added, "Underground clubs, dirty money, maybe even blood on his hands." The words fell like sparks onto Anna's mind, igniting an uncomfortable curiosity. She tried to laugh off the stories, dismissing them as exaggerations spun by those who liked to create myths around powerful men. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that Dan indeed carried a hidden world behind his restrained gestures and precise speech. Whenever he appeared at rehearsals, no one dared lose focus. There was an almost reverent silence, as though everyone feared any mistake would be noticed. Anna, however, found herself playing with more intensity whenever she saw him. It wasn't fear, or not only fear. It was as if her body instinctively responded to that fixed, cold, attentive gaze. On some nights after the concert, she noticed his figure moving through the corridors, always alone, always discreet. Sometimes it seemed his shadow arrived before his steps. The magnetism was undeniable, though disturbing. Anna scolded herself for thinking of him more than she should. It was absurd, dangerous, even ridiculous. Still, there was something in his presence that pulled her into a silent labyrinth with no apparent exit. That Friday, the theater was already empty when Anna closed her sheet music and pulled her coat over her shoulders. It had rained during the concert, and the street outside reflected the lamplight in dark puddles. The cold wind stung her skin. She walked alone, her steps quick, when a shadow stood out ahead of her. "It's late to be walking alone." Dan's voice was calm, but it carried a weight that could not be mistaken for simple concern. She startled, stopping at the curb. He was there, leaning against a sleek black car. The back door was already open, as if he had predicted her arrival. "I live nearby," she tried to explain, adjusting the strap of her bag on her shoulder. He raised an eyebrow, unsmiling, "Close enough to risk crossing these streets by yourself." Anna hesitated. She didn't want to appear fragile, but the city was still unfamiliar territory, and the alleys around the theater didn't inspire safety. "I'll take you" wasn't an offer, it was a statement. Before she could protest, he stepped forward and held the door open for her. The gesture was courteous, but there was an authority in it, as though refusing wasn't really an option. Reluctantly, Anna got into the car. The interior smelled of leather and something subtler, a dry, almost metallic fragrance that seemed to belong to him. Dawn sat beside her, and the driver pulled away in silence. The hum of the engine filled the space but did nothing to ease the tension. Anna kept her hands clasped in her lap, trying to ignore his nearness. She could feel his warmth, even though he sat still, gazing out the window as if watching some distant world. She thought about starting a conversation, anything to break the silence, but no words came. With each passing second, the atmosphere thickened, almost suffocating. Then she felt the touch. Dan's hand rested on hers, firm, unhurried. There was no urgency in the gesture, only a disconcerting certainty. Anna's heart raced. The touch was twofold, protective and threatening, as if he was saying, at once, "You are under my guard and you belong to me." She didn't know whether she wanted to pull her hand away or leave it there. His gaze finally turned to her. In the dim car, his eyes looked darker still, impossible to read. "You shouldn't walk alone." The words were simple, but charged with more than concern. They were command, warning, and promise all in one. Anna swallowed hard, unable to respond. The car glided through the wet streets, moving across the city like a shadow. When they finally stopped in front of the modest building where she lived, Dan didn't hurry to open the door. He only kept his eyes on her, as if trying to imprint her reaction in his memory. "Thank you for the ride," she whispered at last, gathering the courage to speak. He tilted his head slightly, but didn't withdraw his hand until she moved to leave. Anna stepped out, her legs trembling. When she turned back, the car was already pulling away in silence, disappearing like a shadow that had never been there. Inside her apartment, her breath still quick, she leaned against the closed door, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Why did this man, wrapped in rumors and mystery, hold such sway over her? Deep down, she feared the answer. That same night at the theater, the musicians would still whisper about the man in the shadows, the one who carried too much power to ever be tied to a single place. Anna, however, already knew her fate was somehow entangled with his. And for the first time, as she lay down, she realized she wasn't only afraid of Dan, she was afraid of herself, of how much she longed to feel again that cold, firm touch that placed her somewhere between protection and danger. The invitations began almost imperceptibly. A discreet note delivered by an assistant, a short message left in the dressing room, signed only with the initial of his name. Small gestures that, though simple, carried the weight of inevitability. Anna resisted at first, claiming rehearsals or studies as excuses, but Dan seemed to understand her timing. With the patience of a hunter, when she finally accepted an invitation to dine at his mansion, it was no accident. She already felt entangled in an invisible web, and refusing once more would have tasted like a lie. The night was cold when the car left her at the iron gates. The mansion loomed in the distance, illuminated by beams of light that revealed its grandeur. It wasn't just a luxurious house, it was a fortress. Inside, Anna kept silent. The interior impressed not only with its opulence but with its weight. Marble staircases, immense chandeliers, oriental rugs that muffled footsteps, paintings by famous artists lined the walls, but they weren't serene landscapes or warm portraits. They displayed shadowy figures, scenes of struggle, expressions of pain and ecstasy. It was as if each canvas reflected something hidden within Dan himself. There were also locked doors. Anna noticed them in the corridors, sealed with old locks or guarded by discreet men in suits who seemed to watch without blinking. The soft music echoing from somewhere distant couldn't dispel the sense of mystery. "Are you uncomfortable?" Dan's voice reached her firm, yet calm. She turned. He stood there, impeccable as always, holding 2 glasses of wine. "It's just a lot to take in," she replied, accepting the glass. "The mansion holds stories, some beautiful, others not." He raised his glass, toasting without smiling. "But all of them belong to me." Dinner was served in a vast hall lit by candlelight. The food was sophisticated, but Anna barely noticed the flavors. What consumed her was the way Dan watched her, as if every movement, the touch of the glass to her lips, the way she brushed a strand of hair aside, was carefully recorded. After the meal, they walked through the mansion's library. Towering shelves filled with rare books created a dense atmosphere, perfumed by old wood and the lingering scent of wine still in their hands. "Music and literature," he said, running his fingers along the spines of the books. "Both are forms of power. Whoever masters one controls more than emotions. They control destinies." Anna arched her brows, challenging him. "And what about freedom? Isn't that what art seeks?" He took a step closer. "Freedom is an illusion. The world belongs to those who know how to control it." Her eyes narrowed. "That sounds like a prison, or like truth." He was too close now, his shadow enveloping her. "Most people cling to the idea of freedom because they can't bear to see the invisible chains." Anna felt her heart race. The tension grew thick as the silence between notes on the piano. "And you?" she asked, steady though her breath faltered. "Do you want to control me too?" Dan's eyes gleamed darkly. He set his glass down on a nearby table without breaking his gaze. He stepped closer, until Anna could feel his warmth. The dry scent of his skin mingled with the wine. "I want all of you." His voice was low, almost a whisper, but charged with devastating force. "The rest, you'll decide if it's prison or freedom." Before she could answer, the kiss came. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't hesitant. It was a collision, a clash of wills. His lips claimed hers with an almost brutal intensity, as though a battle was hidden in the gesture. Anna tried to resist for an instant, but her body betrayed her. A shiver ran down her spine, and before she realized it, she was kissing him back. Pulled into a whirlpool she didn't want to escape, Dan's hands gripped her waist firmly, guiding her against the shelves behind. The books rattled with the impact. He held her not violently, but with the certainty that she wasn't going anywhere. The kiss was both command and invitation, as if saying, "You have no choice, but you may want to stay." Anna's mind screamed warnings, but her body burned with desire. Each touch of his lips consumed her, stripping away her rationality. She sighed against his mouth, and that sound seemed to ignite him further. The intensity grew, their lips moving like flames refusing to die. His hands slid up her back, firm, exploratory, until they tangled in her hair. At last, Anna surrendered. There was no longer right or wrong, only the certainty that she was plunging into something she could never control. An abyss, dark and dangerous, yet irresistible. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, the silence between them spoke louder than words. Dan kept his gaze locked on her, his breath heavy, his hand still on her waist. "I hope you enjoyed dinner," he murmured, his eyes filled with desire. Anna met his gaze, trembling still. "I did," she whispered, blushing, dizzy from the intensity. The weeks that followed the first kiss became a maze of sensations for Anna. The conservatory, once her refuge of discipline and dreams, now felt like only the prelude to something greater and far more dangerous. The piano was still her breath, but in the corridors of Dan's mansion she discovered another kind of music, that of touch, surrender, and fear. Dan never asked. He commanded with his eyes. His invitation was always a sentence. Anna found herself going, without resistance, as if an invisible force pulled her in. The black car that came for her, the silent entrance through the iron gates, the way they closed behind her, it all felt like a crossing between two worlds. Inside, she was no longer just a young pianist. She became part of a universe that fascinated and unsettled her in equal measure. Their encounters were intense. Every gesture carried weight, every embrace left her shaken. He held her as though claiming something that had always been his. Each sigh, each moment of surrender, felt like both a victory for him and a secret confession from her. She wanted him, even knowing she should resist. She let herself be carried away, as if consumed by a fire that could not be extinguished. But it wasn't just desire, it was power. Dan had the ability to turn each touch into a battlefield. There was tenderness, but a tenderness that hid claws. He kissed her like someone who healed, and in the next moment, he drew her close as if to remind her of his dominance. Anna didn't know if she emerged from those nights stronger or weaker, perhaps both at once. One evening, after hours that had left them exhausted, Dan lay in silence beside her. The sheets were tangled, the scent of him still in the air, and his gaze was fixed on the ceiling as if staring into an abyss. Anna dared to break the silence. "Sometimes you seem far away, as if you're not here with me." It took him a long time to answer. When he did, his voice was low, almost a whisper, "Because I've been in places one never truly returns from." She turned to him, curiosity and fear mixing inside her. His features had hardened with memory. There was no fragility in his expression, only an undeniable weight, places of violence, loss. He continued, eyes fixed on something invisible. "I learned early that weakness isn't allowed. Show weakness and you lose, and you don't survive." Anna swallowed hard. She wanted to comfort him, but she knew such gestures might not be welcome. Don didn't accept consolation, only respect. Still, she reached out, and for a moment he didn't pull away. His fingers intertwined with hers, firm, as if holding on to something he feared to lose. Then he turned to her suddenly, his eyes sharp. "And you? What are you afraid of, Anna?" The question pierced her. She hesitated. She feared failure, of not living up to her talent, of disappointing others. But in that moment, another truth rose to the surface. "I'm afraid of you." The words slipped out before she could stop them. Silence fell heavy. He didn't take offense. On the contrary, a faint smile curved his lips, as if that was the very answer he had been waiting for. "Good girl," he murmured, pressing his lips to her forehead. "Fear keeps you alive." From that night on, Dan's presence grew even more overwhelming. His house seemed to hold too many secrets, more fortress than home. One evening, after a few glasses of wine, Anna wandered from the dining room. Her steps echoed down the corridor as she tried a side door, but the locked handle resisted her. The metallic click sounded too loud. When she turned, Dan was there, watching, still as a shadow. "Curiosity can be dangerous," he said calmly, though his eyes betrayed the sharpness of the warning. Anna's blood ran cold, but she held his gaze, refusing to appear only like an innocent girl lost in his labyrinth. "Then why bring me here?" she dared to ask. Don stepped closer, each stride deliberate. When he stopped before her, his hand lifted her chin. "Because I wanted to." His voice was deep, like thunder restrained. "And because you belong to me, whether or not you've accepted it yet." The words split her in two. Part of her wanted to scream, to break free from the invisible chains he wrapped around her. But another part, the more dangerous one, felt desired in a way she had never known, the longing in his mouth. The words sounded like both promise and threat. At the conservatory, rehearsals grew heavier. Anna no longer played just for herself. Each note carried the weight of his gaze. He didn't need to be present. The memory of him alone was enough to turn her music more passionate, more desperate. Some colleagues noticed a change, more fire, more intensity, but also something darker, a quiet anguish woven into her sound. One afternoon, Clara approached her. "You seem different, as if your soul is being consumed." Anna smiled faintly, unsure if it was a compliment or a warning. Perhaps both. At night, in Dan's mansion, she was divided. Her body longed for him, while her mind battled against the shadows that surrounded him. In his arms, she felt alive, desired, ignited. But she also felt the danger, as if surrendering to a force that could devour her whole. One sleepless night, Anna rose from the bed, wrapped in a sheet, and stood by the vast window. The city glittered in the distance, indifferent to the storm inside her. Dan approached silently, placing a steady hand on her back. "Are you afraid?" he asked. "I am," she admitted. He drew her against his chest, in an embrace that could be read as protection or captivity. "Stay that way. Fear keeps us awake. Without it, you'd already be lost." Anna closed her eyes, leaning into him, torn between feeling sheltered and imprisoned, fascinated and terrified. Her heart no longer knew how to separate longing from dread. And it was then she realized, her fascination with Dan was not only for the man he was, but for the danger he represented. She was standing before a shadow, and still, she couldn't stop following it. The nights at the mansion were no longer just filled with music and desire. They were nights cut through with strange silences, phone calls that ended abruptly when she entered the room, locked doors, and conversations in languages she couldn't understand. Anna was beginning to realize there was more to Dan's presence than the cold power of a wealthy man. Shadows seemed to seep into every corner of that house, secrets breathing behind the walls. She tried to ignore it. She tried to focus on the piano, on her lessons, on the fire he stirred in her skin. But his gaze, grave, always watchful, reminded her that her life was no longer only her own. That night, Anna's sleep was broken by a distant sound. She opened her eyes, disoriented, and saw the bed beside her was empty. Dan was gone. The clock showed just past 3 in the morning. The mansion was drowned in silence, except for the low growl of engines approaching. Anna rose, wrapping the sheet around her body, and walked to the window. What she saw made her heart race. 3 black cars passed through the gates, their headlights cutting the darkness. Men stepped out quickly, their movements sharp, precise. Some carried weapons at their sides. These were not ordinary visitors, not musicians, collectors, or refined guests. They looked like soldiers. Fear paralyzed her for a moment, but curiosity was stronger. She leaned closer to the glass, watching as they entered the mansion silently, as if they already knew every corridor, every shadow. Muffled voices echoed from below, deep, brisk conversations, like orders being given. Anna stepped back. The air felt heavier now. The mansion wasn't just a luxurious home, it was a fortress. When Dan returned to the room nearly an hour later, she was still awake, sitting on the bed with the sheet tight around her chest, her eyes fixed on him. He entered without hurry, removing his jacket, loosening his cuffs. Only then did he notice her stare. "You weren't asleep." His tone was not a question, but a statement. Anna's breath quickened. She didn't want to seem fragile, but she couldn't pretend she hadn't seen. "I saw men coming in," she said firmly, despite her fear. "I saw weapons. I saw what this house hides." Dan froze. His back was to her, but his body seemed to harden. Then he turned, his dark eyes locking on hers, sharp as blades. "And what do you think you saw?" Anna rose from the bed, stepping closer. The cold floor sent shivers through her feet, but the tension between them was stronger than the discomfort. "I saw the truth," she answered, holding his gaze. "You're not just an owner of theaters and clubs and mansions. You are much more dangerous." Dan studied her in silence. Then he walked toward her, slow, deliberate, until their faces were close. His hand lifted her chin, forcing her eyes to stay on his. "Now you know," he whispered, "and there's no turning back." The words fell on her like a seal, not just a confession, a sentence. Her heart pounded. Part of her wanted to run, to scream, to break free of the invisible prison he had built around her. But another part, the most dangerous one, felt even more drawn to him. Knowing the truth didn't push her away, it pulled her deeper. "Then it's all real," she murmured, testing him. "The rumors about you, the clubs, the business, the deaths." A cold smile crossed his face, not pride, but amusement at her boldness. "Rumors always carry a grain of truth, but they're also useful for keeping fear alive." He tilted his head, studying her. "What frightens you more, Anna, what I do, or the fact that you still want me, even knowing it?" The words cut through her. She stepped back slightly, but said nothing. Her silence was answer enough. In the days that followed, her life changed. At the conservatory, Anna tried to focus, but every note seemed burdened with a new weight. She knew too much now. She played as if the piano were the only thing that could cleanse the poison running through her veins. Since she gave herself to him, her colleagues noticed. Some said her music had grown darker, more intense, almost painful. Others whispered in the halls, unsettled by her transformation. At night, at the mansion, she saw more of his world. Discreet meetings, quick visits from men who never spoke to her, guards multiplying around the property. The locked doors seemed louder now. Once, passing through a corridor, she heard muffled shouts from a closed room. She didn't dare approach, but the certainty struck her. Don wasn't just powerful. He was a leader, a predator among men. The confrontation she had avoided became inevitable on a stormy night. They were in his office, a room lined with dark books and heavier paintings. Don read through documents on the solid desk, while she paced, restless. "You can't just pretend I didn't see," she said, breaking the silence. He raised his eyes slowly, closing the folder with calculated calm. "You keep asking for answers, but answers won't set you free." "Then bind me completely," Anna shot back, her voice sharp with defiance. "Because that's what you're doing, pulling me into this world without giving me a choice." Dan stood, approaching her. The air between them vibrated with tension. "You had a choice the moment you first kissed me." His hand gripped her face, firm. "And you chose to stay. I didn't know who you were," she cried, trying to push him back. But his strength held her, pressing her against the shelves, his body close to hers. His eyes burned not with rage, but with certainty. "Now you do. And you're still here." His mouth hovered near hers, the kiss held back only by the tightness of their breathing. "Don't lie to yourself. You're not afraid of me. You're afraid of losing yourself in how much you want me." Anna's breath faltered. Her body longed to surrender. Her mind screamed to resist. But the moment his lips took hers, the world collapsed into fire and shadows. Later, lying in bed, her skin still tingling with the weight of his presence, Anna stared at the ceiling in silence. Dan slept beside her, his breathing steady. Yet even asleep, he seemed like a shadow keeping watch. She knew innocence was gone. Now she had seen his world, a world of weapons, men, and secrets, a world no one left unchanged on still. The question pulsed in her mind, could she escape, even if she tried? The answer whispered back, cruel and certain, no. There was no turning back. The piano had become both a refuge and a prison. Every key Anna touched seemed to carry the weight of something she couldn't name. Longing, fascination, surrender. Since the night she discovered Dan's shadowed world, nothing had been the same. Then still, she couldn't walk away. Her heart begged her to run. Yet her body sought him like someone reaching for fire, knowing it would burn. It was inevitable. Dan had bound himself to her. not just as a lover, but as an invisible chain, forged of shadows and steel. In the days that followed, his presence grew stronger in ways almost imperceptible. At first, it was just a casual question. Where were you today? She answered lightly, not noticing the tension hidden in his tone. Then the questions became sharper. Who is that classmate always speaking to you? Why did you take so long to reply? Anna would laugh, trying to ease his mood. He's just a colleague from the conservatory. I was rehearsing. I lost track of time. But Dan's eyes never accepted excuses. They were cold, watchful, as if searching for hidden truths, and every answer seemed to spark more questions. One afternoon, Anna left the conservatory carrying sheet music when a classmate, Thomas, walked up beside her. He was kind, warm, with a smile that contrasted with the seriousness of most musicians. You played beautifully today, he said, keeping pace with her. The way you interpret the music, it's different. I'd love to hear you play more often. Anna thanked him, shyly, not encouraging further conversation. But when she glanced toward the gate, she saw a car waiting, black, with tinted windows. She knew it instantly. Her heartbeat quickened. Thomas kept talking until the car door opened and Dan stepped out, elegant, commanding, as always. His eyes cut through the air, freezing Anna before he even spoke. Who is he asked, his voice low but laced with warning. Thomas, not understanding, offered his hand politely. Nice to meet you. I'm Anna's classmate. Dan didn't shake it. He only stared, his silence heavier than words. Thomas shifted awkwardly. Anna tried to intervene. Dan, please. He's just a classmate. But Dan was already at her side, his arm wrapping firmly around her waist, as if to remind everyone in sight that she belonged to him. You don't need classmates, he muttered, so only she could hear. Anna's face flushed. It wasn't only embarrassment. It was fear inside the car. Silence pressed down on them. She kept her gaze fixed on the window, refusing to meet his eyes. The air felt heavy, almost unbreathable. Finally, Dan broke the silence. I don't want to see you with him again. He's just a colleague. Dan, she whispered. He turned toward her, his expression torn between anger and something more vulnerable. I don't care. There's no such thing as just when it comes to you. His words wrapped around her like invisible chains, tightening with every heartbeat, every look. And yet, part of her melted under the weight of it, because she had never been wanted, never been desired so fiercely. The weeks that followed were a maze of contradictions. There were moments when Dawn seemed the perfect lover, wine in crystal glasses, nights of music and tender words, soft touches that lingered on her skin. But the smallest detail, a missed call, a delayed message, a laugh shared with someone else was enough to harden his gaze into the same look that could silence armed men. He asked, where were you? Who did you speak with? Why did you smile that way? And Anna found herself explaining every step, every gesture, as if proving her loyalty. Was this love, or was it captivity? One night, after yet another argument about Thomas, Anna rose from the bed, frustration burning in her chest. You can't control every breath I take, she cried. Don followed her calmly, though his eyes blazed. He closed the distance, pressing her against the wall, his presence overwhelming. Can't I? He whispered, lips inches from hers. You already belong to me, Anna. From the first time you touched that piano, from the first look you gave me. Don't fight it. She closed her eyes, trying to summon resistance. But when he kissed her, fierce, consuming her strength unraveled. Desire was as devastating as the fear. It was like falling into an abyss, and still begging for more. Later, lying beside him, her body trembling, Anna stared at the ceiling. She knew something was wrong. She knew love shouldn't feel so suffocating, that desire shouldn't be tied to fear. And yet, she had never known such intensity. She was addicted to him, like drinking poison, knowing it would kill. But unable to let go of the glass. At the conservatory, her distance became noticeable. She no longer lingered in conversations, avoided invitations, slipped away after class. Thomas tried again. Are you okay? You seem distant. Anna forced a smile, saying nothing. Before she could respond, her phone vibrated. A message from Dan. Where are you? Her stomach tightened. She typed almost by instinct, rehearsing. I'll be home soon. Thomas noticed the change in her face. It's him, isn't it? She didn't answer. She just closed her music folder and hurried off. Piece by piece, her world was shrinking. Friends stopped reaching out. Her days were filled only with music and Dan. Everything else was fading. It was as if her life was reshaped around him, held by invisible chains tightening with each passing day. And deep down, she knew, part of her welcomed those chains, because they meant he wanted her, chose her above a world of shadows. But another part of her screamed silently, begging for air. One stormy night, while the wind rattled the windows, Anna left the bed and went to the music room. She sat at the piano and began to play. The notes were heavy, mournful, like a stifled cry. Dan appeared in the doorway, watching silently. She didn't need to look to feel his presence. Are you trying to tell me something? He asked, walking toward her. Anna kept playing, her voice unsteady. I'm trying to remember who I was before you. He stopped behind her, his hands resting on her shoulders. You haven't lost anything. You've only transformed. She froze, her hands hovering above the keys. Turning to face him, her eyes shimmered with tears. And what if I don't want this transformation? Then it's not because you don't want it, he replied firmly, holding her face. It's because you're afraid to accept that this is where you truly belong. Anna shut her eyes, her heart breaking. She no longer knew where love ended and captivity began. She only knew she was already bound. The chains were invisible, but they tightened with every breath. The silence of the mansion felt like a cage. Anna paced back and forth, hands trembling, eyes fixed on the open suitcases on the bed. Each folded piece of clothing seemed like a silent cry of resistance, an effort to remind herself that she still had some control over her life. Yet her heart raced so loudly it felt as if it would betray her plan to the very air around her. Outside, the city carried on its indifferent routine, distant horns, hurried footsteps on the sidewalks, the mechanical hum of everyday life. Inside her, however, there was only a storm, the desire to escape and the fear of being found. She looked at herself in the mirror. The reflection seemed that of a stranger, eyes puffy from sleepless nights, lips pressed into a line of doubt. She wondered if she had the strength to follow through, if she could truly sever the invisible thread that bound her to Dan. And yet, she remembered every night, his touch that was at once fire and tether, his gaze that stripped not just her body but her soul. He was a shadow that had already crept too far into her life, perhaps too far to run from. Still, she closed the suitcase, took a deep breath, turned off her phone. No goodbyes, no explanations, just the abrupt cut she hoped would be final. The taxi was scheduled to arrive in an hour, 60 minutes that stretched like centuries. It was in that fragile interval that the door opened. The metallic sound of a key turning froze Anna in place. Air fled her lungs, and the suitcase in her hand suddenly felt impossibly heavy. When the door swung fully open, Dan entered. There was no surprise in his expression, only the cold certainty of someone who already knew, going somewhere. His voice was low, almost calm, yet every word carried the weight of an unspoken abyss. Anna's throat went dry. She didn't answer immediately, clutching the suitcase to her chest like a fragile shield. I need to leave, Dan. Her voice wavered, but she forced steadiness. This is consuming me. I can't do this anymore. He closed the door behind him. The click of the lock sounded like a verdict. He took a few steps toward her, dark eyes fixed on her every movement, every tremor. I knew, he said, something almost sorrowful hiding beneath his usual ice. From the first day, I knew you would try to run. It's not running, it's surviving, Anna replied, surprising even herself with her courage. You're breaking me, Dan. I don't know who I am with you anymore. He stopped in front of her, close enough for her to feel the warmth of his breath. Slowly, he lifted his hand and touched her face. The gesture was gentle, but the gaze that accompanied it carried the weight of an unspoken confession. You are mine, he said, with a conviction that left no room for doubt. Always will be. Anna closed her eyes for a moment, trying not to succumb to the force of those words. But then he continued, and what came next left her frozen. My world is one where weakness is punished. I've lived surrounded by loss, pain, and shadows. I've learned that the only way to survive is to have control over everything, everyone. And when I saw you, he took a slow breath, as if admitting it was both painful and inevitable. I knew you would be the one thing I could never lose. Tears pricked Anna's eyes. Deep down, there was a part of her that believed him, that saw the vulnerability hidden beneath the iron mask. And yet, it was this same vulnerability that bound her down. She whispered, voice breaking, I can't live like this, trapped, watched, breathless. This isn't love. He cupped her chin, forcing her to meet his eyes. Do you think I don't know? His voice softened to almost a whisper. Do you think I don't understand what you're asking? But what I feel for you, it's not simple, not light. It's the only thing keeping me human. She felt the weight of his words. They carried truth, but also a warning. I can't anymore, she repeated, even though her resolve was fragile. Dan exhaled slowly and stepped back, as if wrestling with something inside him. Then he walked to the window, staring out at the city. The lights reflected like distorted stars on the glass. You have a choice, Anna, he said without looking back. You can leave now, walk away, never look back. I won't stop you. But if you do, it will be like you've died for me. You'll never have my name, my gaze, my touch again. The silence that followed was suffocating. Anna felt her heart pound, the suitcase heavy in her hand as if anchoring her to the floor. He turned to face her, eyes burning like embers. You can stay. Accept what I am. Accept the flawed love I offer. Accept that the freedom you seek doesn't exist because it's already intertwined with me. The words fell over her like invisible chains. Anna closed her eyes. She tried to imagine leaving, crossing the city, starting over. But in every scenario, Dan's shadow followed. He was inside her in a way that no taxi, no suitcase, no escape could erase. When she opened her eyes again, he was still watching, and for a moment, she glimpsed the fear in his expression. It wasn't just possessiveness, it was desperation. She dropped the suitcase to the floor. The sound echoed like a verdict. Dan approached slowly, as if afraid she might change her mind. He held her in his arms, the embrace both warmth and confinement. "So, you're staying," he murmured into her hair. Anna didn't respond. Her body yielded, but her mind screamed. Because even though she had chosen, the doubt remained. Was this passion, or a prison she could never escape? The silence that filled the room after their last confrontation was heavy, almost tangible. The suitcases remained in the corner, open, like traces of a failed attempt to escape. Byla sat on the edge of the bed, her trembling fingers gliding over the sheet, unsure whether to speak or just breathe. Lian stood by the window, partially shrouded in the night's shadows. The rain fell steadily outside, marking the end of something or perhaps the beginning of a new reality. He didn't look directly at her, but his presence filled the room. There was a contained tension about him, as if a lifetime of secrets were about to surface, and when he finally spoke, his voice was deep, carrying a sincerity that seemed to cut through years. "You need to understand, Byla," he said, not taking his eyes off the darkness. "I never had a choice. My father—" He paused, taking a deep breath, gathering courage from painful memories. "My father was a powerful and feared man. I grew up surrounded by that." His eyes closed briefly. "I inherited everything, not just the business, but also the weight of responsibility. This life isn't something you simply leave behind. It's a chain that binds me, and now it binds you too." The words fell on Byla like quiet stones. She had always suspected, sensed it in the subtle glances, the guards, the unexplained midnight meetings, but hearing it so clearly from him was like feeling a door close forever. "There's no way out for me, Byla." Now he looked at her, his green eyes burning with intensity. "If you want to stay by my side, you'll have to accept who I am. That is the price." Bela's heart raced. Every beat seemed to echo through the room. She stood at the edge of a precipice, about to take a step with no return. She understood what this meant. Being with Lian was not just about passion or love. It was about living in shadow, accepting fear, giving up the lightness of a normal life. It was surrendering to something that could both protect and overwhelm. Her body trembled, but not from hesitation. Desire and fear mingled, becoming inseparable. Deep down, the truth was clear. She didn't want to turn back. Byla slowly got up and walked to him. Each step carried the weight of a definitive choice. When she stood before Lian, she lifted her hand and touched his face gently, yet firmly. "I've already accepted it, Lian." Her voice was low, almost a whisper, but full of conviction. "I chose you from the very first day, no matter the cost." His eyes closed for a moment, as if those words pierced deeper than any gesture could. Then he pulled her close, their lips meeting in a kiss that was not only passion but also mutual surrender. The kiss carried the taste of trust and conscious choice. His arms wrapped around her like invisible protection, and Byla gave herself fully, returning the intensity as if in that moment there were no separate destinies, only one, entwined with trust, desire, and understanding. When they pulled apart, breathless, Lian rested his forehead against hers. "You don't know what you're saying. This world can be difficult." "Then let it be difficult," Byla replied, steady, "but by your side." The words hung in the air, irrevocable. Something broke and something formed inside her at the same time. The young pianist who had arrived in the city chasing dreams had given way to a woman willing to walk through shadows for a love she could not deny. The night went on, and they stayed together, silently connected. There were no promises of the future, only certainty in the present. Lian with his commanding presence, and Byla with her conscious surrender. In the following days, Byla felt the weight of her choice more and more. The mansion doors that once intrigued her now closed with certainty, and the attentive eyes around made clear that she already belonged to that world. She was not merely a visitor, she was his daughter. Yet despite the fear, Byla felt an unexpected peace. By accepting the abyss, she stopped struggling against it. Their love was a mix of freedom and surrender. Freedom in not needing to pretend. Surrender in embracing the truth of their feelings. There were no illusions of normality, no lies of perfection, only the raw authenticity of two people who found each other and decided to walk together. On the last night of this cycle of revelations, Byla sat alone at the piano in the mansion's hall. The keys were cool under her fingers, but the music that emerged was intense, carrying all that she felt: desire, fear, surrender. Lian watched silently from a distance, a mixture of pride and care in his eyes. He knew what it meant to have someone accept his darkness, and he also knew how profoundly it would change her forever. When the final note faded into the air, Byla closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "Loving Lian is like walking toward the unknown. I know every step takes me deeper, but it's the path I choose. Even in the abyss, he is the one I want. I will always choose him."